Well, then while you were in Claremore, that first time, would you stay sometimes with your uncle?
With Uncle Jim.
Yeah.
I don't remember living with Uncle Jim but the one time, and I was a pretty good sized kid then. I must have been about 12. And then's when we had Uncle Willie and brought all of his 3 kids down too, and Uncle Jim had them too, you know. We had 7 of us there.
When was it that Lynn lived with you?
He was one of them, and he was a little fella. He was, he was just a little fella. I don't guess he's over, kind of like Sarah.
So he was only about 5 then?
Yeah, he was just a little fellow, maybe not that old. He was the time he went in the water that, I told you about that. See, Edgar pulled the sled, Uncle Jim made him a sled where they could put a big bucket on it and go down to a spring quite a little way. Well, it wasn't too far from the house. And then they could get this cold spring water coming right out of the rocks, you know. And Edgar, he filled this big bucket and brought it back up in the afternoon hot, you know. And of course, I was right there to get a drink, and Edgar says, "Lily, if I was you, I wouldn't drink that." Said Lynn went and wet in it. He followed along behind the little sled, and he was just a little fella.
That was Lynn Riggs you're talking about?
Yeah, Lynn Riggs. Yeah.
Okay. Well, did he spend some time with your family, with your mom? Did she help raise him?
Well, they stayed down there with Uncle Jim and all of us kids, and then when, of course, when Mom would be there, that was all the home Mom had was there with Uncle Jim.
Yeah.
And when she come home, he'd be there. She'd take some time off sometimes and come home for a day or two. And but Lynn stayed with us. And then after he was grown, he still stayed with us. He was the one that caused Mama's house to burn down. He was smoking, and Mom said she knew, but she would never say anything to him. So they was all sitting in the dining room, and they had a great big wood coal stove. And said Lynn was sitting over by a window, and the curtain was coming down, and he was smoking, and he had his ashtray on the windowsill.
Mm-hmm.
And Mom says, I know he left a live cigarette, and it caught that curtain afire. The fire started in the dining room where they was all sitting, and the roof was ready to fall in on when Mama woke up. Willie went out the front door, her and Fisher and Dolores. Dolores was a baby. And Mom went out the back door, and before they got together, that roof fell in. They just come that near Willie and Dolores. And Lynn, Lynn had come in from college, and he threw his suitcase and things out through a window, and then I probably went out through the window. See, they had a long hall. It was a real nice place, and Mom had bought 10 acres in this house.
Now, where was this?
That was in Claremore.
In Claremore, okay.
That was after I was married. So and Lynn was there. Instead of going home to his daddy's house, he come to Mama's.
Yeah.
And he had to sleep in Raymond had some furniture. He'd been living someplace, I don't know where. And anyway, his furniture was there at Mama's, so they set Raymond's bed up in the living room, and Lynn slept in there.
Oh.
And when he found out the house was on fire, he threw his stuff out the window, and they all met out in the back. But it burned up. It even burnt the dog up and the birds. And Mama had a dressed hog laying on the back porch, and they didn't have time to get anything out.
So they just lost everything, didn't they?
Lost everything. We had got Mama a new suit it was for Christmas. See, this happened the 22nd day of December. And some way or another, she got that suit out. And after the fire was over, we found that suit out in the, she had she called it the smokehouse. It's a place where she put stuff, you know, like.
Yeah. Now, were you already living in Sapulpa at that time?
I was married then.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this was in
I got married in 1909.
In 1909, and the fire then was what? About when, do you know?
The fire must have been
around 1920 or so.
Well, it may have. Well, let me see. Mom had sold the restaurant, or let Frank have. Frank had the restaurant. She had let him have it. He was my youngest brother, and she had retired, and she had money to live on, but she didn't have money to go back in business, so she had to go back and take the restaurant back and start all over again.
Yeah.
And that was, now I don't know how old Dolores was. It must have been in the 20s.
Okay, Lynn was in college, though, at Norman
at the time. Yeah, Lynn was in college, yeah.
Now, where was the house now? Is this the house that was out kind of south of Claremore?
But when you go down Main Street, you turn to your right and go out in there.
Uh-huh.
And it burnt down. And Mama didn't have only $2,500 insurance on it, and you couldn't anyways never build it back for that. So she built back just a little 4-room domed house, and Frank, my brother and his wife lived out there.
Did she own that land?
Yeah, 10 acres.
Okay. So then they sold the land later,
I guess they sold the whole business later. But when she died, she didn't have nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Kids used to go there and stay when they didn't have a job, and she couldn't have anything. I never did have to stay with her. I always had my own home, but and Aunt Dolly didn't, but the rest of them did. They just lose their jobs, and then they'd all pack up and go home, kids and all.
Yeah.
And but Mom never would say anything. She only had 2 eggs. She'd give them a half of it or all of it if they needed. She's that way with her family or with anybody else. If you went to her house now, she'd ask you if you've had your dinner or was you hungry.
Mm-hmm.
She always wanted to feed everybody.
Well, now when she retired, she left what restaurant? This was a restaurant back in Claremore then?
She left the restaurant there with Uncle Jimmy.
Okay, she came down to Oklahoma, to Sapulpa for a while.
Yeah, and she tried it here and she couldn't make it here. And then she went on over to, I believe it was Collinsville, and she didn't like it over there. She couldn't do no good over there. And she went back to Claremore.
Mm-hmm.
And then Uncle Jim put her back in business.
Okay, she did okay then in that restaurant?
That's when she made her money.
And then she kind of retired?
Then she retired.
And gave the...
And she gave the restaurant to, Frank rented a, no, she let somebody else have the restaurant for a while. And she owned the 2 houses, 2 next to it, them 2 old houses there, you know.
Uh-huh.
She owned them 2. She bought them and rented them, and she got a loan on them. So the last time Uncle Jim put her in business, that time she stayed until she made some money, and then she
Okay,
bought them.
this is your Uncle Jim Riggs.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
He was an old bachelor until just before he died. A few years before he died, he married his housekeeper.
Mm-hmm.
But she,
Now, he owned that boarding house up there, didn't he?
yeah, and then they've tore it down. I don't know why they've tore it down, but the house still sits there.
Yeah, both those houses are there.
Mama's house
No,
still-
one of the houses there.
Yeah, it's still there.
The hotel was called the St. James.
Yeah.
In Claremore.
Yeah,
Okay.
St. James. Yeah. Uncle Jim was good to us kids.
Mm-hmm.
One time he bought I've got to quit that. One time he bought a hog from Uncle Willie
Uh-huh.
to feed us when we was living with him out on the farm. And then later, Uncle Willie remembered he didn't weigh the head. And he told him, says, Jimmy, I didn't weigh the head. And I guess Uncle Jim had to pay him for it. And Uncle Jim says, see, Lillie, he wouldn't even give a head hog towards raising you. I never will forget Uncle Willie saying that, Uncle Jim saying that. He said, Lillie, see, he wouldn't give a head hog towards raising you. And Uncle Jim would give us the last thing he had.
Yeah. Now, the Willie you're talking about was William Grant Riggs.
Yeah, he's Lynn's daddy,
Yeah.
and Edgar and Mattie.
Mm-hmm.
Mom had all of them coming in on it, all but Edgar. Edgar never did. He stayed with his daddy. He was the oldest. He was older than Lynn, and he could ride a horse. And Uncle Willie would go out to the farm and round up his cattle, and he'd go around to people's houses and buy a house. If he see, he'd buy one cow, and he'd bring them in and fatten them up, and then he'd ship them. Maybe he'd take 2 carloads of cattle to St. Louis or Kansas City to the stock yards and sell them. So Edgar stayed with him, and